Everybody keep yourselves muted and we will commence.
All right, welcome back.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. Glad you. Hope you all had a great lunch. This is the home stretch here, so we're going to dive right into it with Victor on some pasture land. How to link the what you see in the land on pasture land to cart. Take it away, Victor.
Victor.
I can hear you now. For some reason, I couldn't hear you to start with.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Have you started or?
No, I was just waiting. For some reason, I was not picking up anything. I apologize for that. Are you ready for me?
Yes.
All right. All right. I want to talk about how some pasture condition score indicators are used in CART today, and a little bit about some other pasture resource concerns. First of all, there's three basic questions for livestock that you'll be asked, and they are pretty basic. Are there livestock present or not? Yes or no. What is the primary species? And you can decide and check what that species is in the list. And then animal numbers. Don't get too hung up on this animal number figure. Just mark it the best you can to the number of animals that are present. As far as we know, it's not looking at animal units. And I think it's going to be used probably more in the future than it is right now. We've mentioned it 2 or 3 times this week already. Pasture condition score sheet indicators are used in CART. There's 7 of them that are used. Some are the main indicators and some are sub-indicators, and we'll talk about that as we go through this today. Just to make sure everybody is clear, here in Indiana, we will be using the pasture condition score sheet. We will not be using the DIPH, which is determining indicators of pasture health. This is, for most part, for more slightly transitional areas and conditions between pasture and range. And you'll be glad probably we're not using it because it has 22 indicators instead of just 10, and it takes a lot longer to complete. And yet it just addresses pretty much the same resource concerns. I've been working on a pasture resource concern kind of crosswalk type of chart, and hopefully we'll have this out in the near future for reference. I think it make a good quick reference. It also notes on here where sub-indicators are used and a little bit of additional guidance. And we're going to go through most of this today in my presentation here. We'll start with erosion on pasture, and the component for answering sheet and reel erosion reflects, 3 indicators: plant cover, plant vigor, and sheet and reel erosion under erosion. So when you're doing PCS in the field, you're rating each individual type of erosion by circling the rating for each. If it's not present, you can just leave it blank. We've talked about that before. The PCS score for erosion is reflective of the most adverse resource concern of erosion type, that is. But for this particular indicator, for this particular question, excuse me, you will be looking at only the sub-indicator. And so you'll be if the sheet and reel erosion is rated a 3, if you circle that in the field as a 3 or you marked it as a 3, even though gully erosion may be a 2 and the total or accumulative score is a 2, we'll still use a 3 for that sheet and reel question. Wind erosion is kind of be the same way. It reflects only two indicators though, plant cover and sheet and, well, wind erosion, excuse me. And so if you rated the individual sub indicator for wind as a 5, again, even though the overall score is a 2, you're going to call that a 5 with the wind erosion. And so when you look at your question in CART, you'll rate that high because it was rated a 5 with the PCS. Classic gully erosion does not technically use the PCS for CART, but you can still use it as a reference looking at the sub-indicators. You know, if you're out there anyway doing the PCS, you're going to know whether or not, and especially if you've interviewed the producer, if there's any gully erosion in that field. So basically, for gully erosion, you're just going to be marking it. Are there any observed or not? Bank erosion is also not linked directly to the PCS, but it certainly can be a reference also. You know, if stream bank erosion was noted, you would need to check the water feature modifier for this to be included in the assessment though. And so if you did do that, then you would rate it accordingly, whether it's stable, waterly unstable, or unstable. And those correspond fairly well with what you would find or how you marked the PCS if you looked at that in the field also. For organic matter depletion, the threshold question is actually software answered, but you'll still need to answer the rating for the second based on PCS scores. And it's using or looking at 3 different indicators: live or dormant plant cover, plant residue for soil cover, and plant diversity. Now, the difference here is asking you to look at all 3 of these. And you will look for the most adverse score, and that's going to determine your CART score. So in this case, it's looking at live plant cover, plant residue, and soil cover. If the lowest rating for any of these would happen to be, say, well, let's give an example. If live plant cover and plant diversity were both rated a 4 on the score sheet, and plant residue, soil cover was rated a 2, then you're going to rate that as a 2. You'll go after lowest score. Otherwise, they all have to be a 3 or all have to be a 4 to meet that moderate or high category. That makes sense? The same thing goes with soil organism habitat or degradation. Everything in a PCS lines up exactly with CART, or perhaps it's probably better said CART doesn't line up sometimes exactly with the PCS. I think I've said that before. You always look at the score where you think, so you need to reach each of them carefully. This here, it is using the same indicators as the last question: live plant cover, plant residue, and plant diversity. And it's not looking at soil compaction and soil regenerative features, but you still could use that as a little bit of a background indicator. But when you're answering the questions, you should base it off of indicators. And again, you'll rank it based on the lowest score. In other words, all 3 of these would need to be a 4 to call it a 4. If one of them was a 3, then it would go down to the 3 category. And a 3 category would be considered low. Compaction is basically an easy one because this could basically ask you if it's significant or not. So it's basically a yes or no question. And instead of, in this case, you don't look at just the sub-indicators, you would look at the whole indicator score for soil compaction and soil rigidity features. And so if it's rated a 3 or higher, then it is, a 4 or higher, then it is not a resource concern. If it's a 3 or lower, then it would be a resource concern. And you would say it is significant. So in a case like this, again, we would be using the total or cumulative score. And so just to be perfectly clear, if compaction was a 3, but yet roots for some reason showed a 2, then we would use that 2 factor in this case and not just the individual compaction score. I know that's a bit confusing going back and forth, but for the most part, when you're looking at the soil compaction and soil rigidity indicators, it's pretty much always used as the total score. When you're looking at erosion, then those can be looked and should be looked at more individual sub-factor scores. For aggregate instability, again, you have a threshold question that is software answered, but you're still going to need to answer the rating per the second based on NRCS. Again, the total overall indicator score would be used for the soil compaction regenerative features indicator. And just note to overlook the wrong word in this question or statement. Condition should be compaction on these. If naturally available moisture is marked as a resource concern, and that's not going to happen too often, but if you particularly have a site that's maybe on some reclaimed ground, some strip mine ground, or a soil that happens to be extremely droughty, then you might want to mark this. It's going to cover or ask for, if you do mark it, it's going to ask you for 2 different indicators and how they score. It's going to be the soil compaction regenerative features again, and the live plant cover. And so you just basically answer those accordingly, and they may show up in separate elements. Plants and productivity and health on Pasture is based off of 3 indicators, and those are percent desirable species, plant cover, and plant vigor. And all are taken pretty much directly off the pasture condition score sheet. That makes it pretty easy. In other words, the high figure would be a 5 and the low figure would be a 1 on the scoring. For this question, it may not always come up, you want to use the overall score for the soil compaction and soil rigidity features again. And it's pretty much as a guide, use that as a guide to answer the question. These are pretty easy. I don't think you're going to have any problems answering these questions for the most part. For plant pest pressure, you need to refer to the percent desirable plant indicator to answer this question. And so you're going to rank it basically the same as it's noted on the score sheet again. So, and this can also be some interview with the producer would also be good, and could be used to kind of guide you in this answering this question also. CART mentions ephemeral gullies. I think I mentioned that earlier this week. We don't normally use this terminology on pasture, but rather as more advanced rills or beginning gully erosion. Ephemerals are advanced rills. Either way, for the most part, they are the beginnings of a classic gully, so we do want to address them. And so if this appears in your questions, then you're basically just going to answer it whether they are observed or not. It's pretty easy. If either feed and forage balance or water, which I'll talk about in a minute, is noted in a field visit, or if the producer is concerned or requested, then you'll need to check the boxes in the tool for equip planning to add that in. If you're planning prescribed grazing, the animal forage balance is still going to be required for that standard anyway. The objective is to balance the quantity and quality of feed and forage to meet livestock needs and reduce negative impacts to other resources, of course. Too many livestock for the pasture resource is pretty much a common concern. We see that a lot. So a lot of times we need to address this. For pasture, use the animal forage balance sheet to answer this question, but for cart, answer based on the producer response and the PCS indicators, percent desirable plants and plant diversity. You can base it off those two things to answer your question, and based off what the producer is telling you. Pasture is pretty easy. Again, if it's identified as a problem, you're going to rate it on 3 factors: water quality, quantity, and pretty much access, which is looking at the walking distance from any place in the pasture to that water site. So if you mark this as a resource concern, then this is the questions that you'll be answering. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about heavy use area protection sites, or what I call HUAPs. Depending on how a HUAP is used and what they're used for, they address a couple of different resource concerns. First, sheet and reel erosion, and perhaps leading to some gully erosion. But it can also indirectly improve compaction by providing an area for livestock to be under wet conditions, as long as we're managing it that way and keep them off the rest of it. They can also help to improve water quality if managed correctly. I think, like I think I mentioned on Monday, one of the bigger concerns is knowing where these areas are at, especially winter feeding areas, how long they're going to be used, and how they are associated or how close they are to any water body. This is picked up from the pasture condition score sheet. So you can get an idea of how to address this under the livestock concentration areas on that. They are probably best used, honestly, to address erosion and water quality concerns around watering and feeding areas, and used with supporting practices such as fence, buffers, livestock exclusion, and prescribed grazing, of course. All right, I think I'm done. Does anybody have any questions for me?
The chat room.
All right. Well, I'll be on for a while, so I'll turn it over to whoever is speaking next.
And
That'll be Tony. Yep.
Me. Where's my don't know about the rest of you, but I always love this transition. As you know, people are waiting on you, and you hope you're hitting everything correctly, and sometimes it doesn't quite go. Come on. All right, so hopefully I'm on the presenter slide. Shannon or Al, can you confirm that?
You're good.
So, okay. Hopefully. So very good. We've talked a little bit this week already about the resource concerns related to the farmstead, and we want to go into that a little bit more and how this planning, this conservation planning, and the criteria ties into CART. We've talked a little bit about the water quality and those resource concerns, specifically a little bit on erosion and storage of fuel and agrochemicals, a little bit on livestock operations and the manure handling, storage, and applications of that manure, and then also a little on the energy use on the farm. So we want to do a little bit more on that. But I do kind of want to emphasize, how important it is that we pay attention to what's going on at the farmstead and think about these various things, the storages and what's going on. National put those in there for a reason. I think it's rightfully so. We think about conservation planning on the whole farm. We can be doing lots of really good things out in the field with conservation, with related to soil health and no-till and cover crops and all those different tweaks and improvements and things that we're working on. We're trying to get producers to make, but just a few resource concerns related to the farmstead can have a major impact. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to those as well. So digging into those a little bit more into CART. So as these resource concerns are assessed, we know in this example, we brought up farmstead and added confined animal operations and nutrient on here so we could have these resource concerns show up that we want to. But, we're going to have those likely load in here. We'll look at these a little more. Then related to that, the erosion, obviously more familiar to us. Is there active gully or is there not active gullies going on within the farmstead? How we tie points to that. In this case, since there are active gullies going on around there, we would just end up giving that 1 point. No additional Indiana guidance on that. Hopefully that is clear for what we're assessing. Almost every operation handles or stores fuel in some manner. And we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. The question is, do they have secondary containment for fuel storage? That is the only piece that CART is interested in, and just ask if it's there. It doesn't ask the condition, doesn't ask if it's roof, doesn't ask any of those additional items. So just want to make sure that secondary containment is present. Another piece, depending on how much the operation does their own pesticide applications, fertilizer applications, are those agrochemicals mixed or loaded and handled, and are they is there secondary containment in place? So National did not distinguish the amounts of the products, agrochemical products, but we defaulted to the Indiana rules and regulations related to the state chemist's office. We talked about those a little bit more, and in most cases just be asking a question and making sure that if they need to have this, they have it. But we start seeing these larger storage items, storage facilities there, and it's pretty easy to spot those secondary containments. And hopefully those, if aren't already in place, are being worked on, and thinking about those. Additionally, thinking about the storage and handling of nutrients. How are those nutrients on the operation, potential for movement to surface and groundwater? Within CART, there's a livestock question, has no impact, just an inventory question only. but it does trigger additional questions. Talked about this before, but when we're answering this, we want to make sure we're just collecting all we need to do is the animal numbers, strictly based on that. And that just collected, built within the questions in cart. Along with that, do the livestock have controlled or uncontrolled access to the surface water bodies? And we're talking livestock, we're not including ducks or geese in this case. So just want to pay attention to how much access they have, and then is that area actively managed? And there's different ways that we can manage that and fence and control and the access to these sensitive areas and giving very limited access at best, or obviously crossings, but trying to make sure that is paid attention to. Additionally, how the nutrients and pathogens are stored and handled, or potentially discharged from the farmstead. If it's not applicable, it's the 60 points, and if we do have control, it's 51, and if we have no control in place, it's 0. So in this case, we've had this before, showed this picture before. Runoff, don't have the gutters, little to no curbing, a lot of runoff off this facility, water quality concerns, erosion, pathogens, nutrients. So the points on that would be 0. Then hoping what we have in place, especially related to beef and dairy cattle, some sort of outside lots, trying to make sure we have some sort of controlled treatment, this case with the curbs and the waste holding ponds, and then that would be worth the 51 points, because that would be controlled, and we have little to no runoff off of this site. Additionally, how is the manure that's there? How is it stockpiled? How is it stored? And then also there's a minor question related to mine waste pollutants. I don't think that'll be a huge factor for us, but it's a minor question, so mostly we just mark that as not applicable. But if we do have manure on site, if we don't have storage, have runoff off of that, and then that would be 1 point. And if we have good storage in place, we don't really get into if we've got enough storage to get through the winter or not, just whether we have the right amount of storage available, and then that would be worth the 51 points. Another thing we look at on the farmsteads is inefficient energy, and it's required to be completed if we are looking at the farmstead. And so just asking what the inventory is, what the question is, what type of buildings are on site, and then within that, we go through and collect the information. We talked about it earlier, collecting information on the type of fuels and products that are used, and then that's going to be used to help us determine that energy use index, and then broken down by the low, moderate, high, severe, and extreme, as to how much of a concern that's going to be. And then in those cases, we'd end up running that through the energy use index energy tool, and would go through, and then that'll give us what those values are on that back on that previous screen. That low, moderate, or extreme will help us work through that and make comparisons to those operations.
Hey, Tony.
Yep.
Would you mind going back one slide and just highlighting some of those, I don't want to call them free passes, but kind of a low energy demand systems, and just make sure that everyone understands that there are some operations where you don't actually have to run the energy use indicator for CSP.
Sure. So here in the guidance, so back there on that they're under the low, like if we already have an ag energy management plan, a cap, then that's been assessed. We assume they're addressing some of those things. If the farmstead has few buildings or equipment, no grain dryers, or uses continuous no-till, would not need to run the energy use index. Also, if they have the buildings with some livestock, but only occasional heating or cooling, and with continuous no-till, they would not need to run the tool as well. Or if they have a grain dryer that it's a new grain dryer, then they wouldn't need to run that either. So, and then also with the continuous no-till. So, hopefully when we're dealing with these, we've got some of these operations that, if they're newer, a little less involved, or the no-till there. And I think the thing is continuous no-till, not rotational no-till, unfortunately. So, but hopefully that clarifies a little bit. And that was all that I had. Any other comments related to the farmstead? I think I've quit sharing now. So Shannon, do you have anything else to add or any other questions from anyone?
Let's pause here for a minute, though. Make sure nobody has anything.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Everybody shy this morning or this afternoon? Too full? All right. Well, again, if you have questions, even as I start on the next topic, by all means, please type that in the chat. Raise your hand. We can definitely interrupt and make sure we get all your questions answered. Before I start, again, those of you that participated on Thursday, you got to meet Dan Shaver, our brand new NRCS Indiana State Forester. So pumped up to have him on board. Also like to introduce another individual on my staff for an interim period here while Jennifer Chen is on national headquarters detail, and that's Jamie Schonkweiler. So really appreciate Jamie and her help in helping keep Indiana's business tools and conservation planning efforts moving while Jennifer is out helping the nation as well. So I wanted to introduce those folks and let you know that they are available for your help, and we'll do our best. So we'll go ahead and get started on the next topic, which is going to be the cart and forestry. And let's see here. We'll just do it this way. Oops, there it was. Well, get to see my family. That's always fun. So here we go. All right. So bridging that land, real world example, bridging the real world and for our forest lands into cart. Again, just going to start out at that spreadsheet. Reminder of what are the required resource concerns on our forest land. Again, we went through that little exercise on Monday. That has now been released, and use that for your benefit, please. You notice just a few resource concerns here on the general planning equip side of things. However, if you do document that forest is grazed, here in Indiana, we do also want you to assess pathogens as well as compaction in our forest lands. And of course, since we can't make things simple, our CSP program has additional or different nationally required resource concerns. You can see there if we have a water feature in our forest in CSP, we do assess that bank erosion. That is not the case for general planning / equip. Again, use this tool as well as the tables that we issue to hopefully help you sort those out and make sure that you are as efficient and effective as possible every chance that you get to get out on the farm. Real quick, I'm going to pause there. Any comments or questions on required resource concerns on forestry? CSP versus other. Okay, fairly straightforward, I hope. So we'll continue. As we mentioned on Tuesday and Thursday, you know, our one of our key tools for our forest technical assistance and program assistance is our partners, and they're providing us a forestry management plan. Again, whether that be a technical service provider through CAP 106 or through our new agreement with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry and their planning sheet that they give us. So we're going to kind of walk through these resource concerns and how to tie in the forest management plans with what CART needs fed. Okay. So first of all, as Victor alluded to, and Tony, that you know, much like on the livestock side of things, documenting some key, just basic information, so too does the forest part of CART. And I'm talking primarily here on the plant productivity and health, but again, this ripples through in other assessments as well. For the most part, you can see this big old long list. And so again, in our Indiana guidance, we pretty much are asking you to whittle this down to 3 options. One, upland hardwoods dominated by oak, which is that forest group 500. But if we're dealing with bottomlands, now we're down into that forest group 700. And then if we're dominated by maple, we'll pick that 800 category. The bottom line on this one, don't sweat this decision. Right now, it does not matter. But again, we've tried to whittle it down to help you figure out which forest type should be selected here in CART to 3 types here in Indiana. And again, I have an example of a forest stewardship plan, or forest management plan, excuse me, where they identify the primary species being oak hickory. So again, that would be a forest group 500. Okay, pretty simple, I hope. Again, it's extra clicks, and by golly, I know that we all hate that, but it's something we have to do. You can't get through CART without it. Moving on, the next question for plant productivity and health that's going to come up is asking about the client's forest management plan. If you choose and again, this I just want to kind of highlight here, this is one of those areas where we feel that national guidance is fairly self-explanatory, so we didn't provide additional Indiana guidance. If by chance you dive into any of these questions and it just makes no sense, or we didn't provide sufficient guidance to you, reach out to your resource management specialist and us at the state office, and we'll make sure to put that in as an update to this tool here. But pretty much if you select that first option, that the plan is actively being followed and all current practices have been implemented that will improve plant productivity and health, there really is no resource concern associated with plant productivity and health. So if you select that, you will get no further questions in CART. It'll move you on to the next one. And again, if that's the case, I'm gonna backtrack. We probably should not have even selected plant productivity and health in the first place. But again, this allows us to, again, we selected it. This allows us to get through it. CART will say all's well. We'll move on to the next assessment. All the other 3, again, it's fairly self-explanatory, but all the next 3 do the exact same thing in CART, and they bring up additional questions about this resource concern. So here's where we're getting a little more detail. The first one up there, managed tree species are native and best suited for sustainability. In Indiana, that's normally not a problem. Most of our forests, whether they were plantations or naturally occurring, have evolved into be mostly native species and best suited for sustainability. But again, if we find a site, a forest management plan says, hey, there's a bunch of, I don't know, loblolly pine planted out here and it's just not working, that might be where we say no. But for the most part, we're going to say yes. Again, remember, CART is a national tool. These questions on the national side are national. We've done our best here in Indiana to try to bring them home here and help you get through this without having to think as much, allowing you to spend more of your time thinking about what's important rather than wasting your time trying to sort out the unimportant stuff. Okay. So the next item that will come up under plant productivity and health on your forest land is the stand stocking levels. Here's where we kind of gave some guidance to you on how to link up your forest management plan to the right answer. You can see here on our stand number 1, we are adequately stocked our forester said it's a excellent pre-treatment quality. There's really no need for forest stand improvement. We're just going to pretty much let it continue to be managed as it has. No need for action. That's a yes on this question. Stand number 2, however, is overstocked. It's only of fair quality. Needs a heavy forest stand improvement. And so we're gonna say that currently no stand stocking levels are not appropriate for the site. Likewise, you may have a forest management plan that has more of a narrative, one that's not developed by our partners at the DNR. Again, there's an example of a narrative that would put you into this category. Next question on this resource concern gets more into again that productivity and health kind of terminology and with tree vigor and so on. So again, taking these two separate management plans and helping you decide which stand goes where. And again, much like your croplands, forest lands can have very separate stands. So again, you may say slight to moderate on the left, click right for the stand number 1, extreme on stand number 2, and associate that with stand number 2. Okay. Hopefully fairly clear. Again, as you get into these and it's not comfortable, reach out to your RMS and Dan Shaver, and we'll walk you through this process and make sure we get you assessed in the right way. So let me stop there. Any questions on plant productivity and health resource concerns in CART? All right, not too bad, is it? All right, moving on to another key resource concern on our forest land, plant structure and composition. And again, much similar, our Indiana guidance attempts to use terminology that is likely you're going to see in our forest management plans or our forest planning sheets. And again, just an example of where the various stands would fit in the CART nomenclature. And again, this is one thing that I'm hoping that we can influence at the national level. Again, when you get into CART, all you see under this question is that left-hand side in the top of that spreadsheet. All you see, forest community quality, 80% of stands, 61 to 80% of stands, 41 to 60% of stand, so on and so forth. Man, that means hardly anything, I would guess, to anybody, forester or agronomist. So again, that's where we did our best to try to help you out to know where these various stand conditions fit to assess this resource concern. And again, the value of CART is that a lot of those other questions that you've already answered for the plant productivity and health are also assessed and used in this resource concern, but you don't have to do that twice. So that is one positive thing about CART. You enter data once, it ripples through the system, much like what Stephanie explained. Once you tell CART what that crop rotation and tillage system is, it ripples through a whole host of resource concerns without you having to duplicate that. So again, we are on the right track with CART and at the national level. A lot of room for improvement, of course, but there always is, and that's what keeps us moving. Questions are
Shannon?
Yeah.
I've got a statement/question that was made.
Great.
See if you can follow up on this. So each stand will need to be split into a separate PLU, so assessment can be based on each stand.
If the stands are that different, yes. Not necessarily, a PLU would be a forest stand, much like a crop field. If they're different enough, if they're very similar, they may just be different species. Don't sweat that. But if they're different in stocking levels, difference in invasives, then we would want to see that level of detail in our CART assessment as well as in our future conservation plan and contract. Good question.
Thank you.
Good question. And again, a quality forest management plan would also have that map to match the stand designations. So again, that might take some physical digitizing in CD to get that, because of course, Farm Service Agency's Common Land Unit likely will not have the forest divvied out in stands like some of our forest management plans might. And again, if we have a GIS savvy forester, maybe they already have that shapefile. They might be able to get that to you and we can upload that into Conservation Desktop and save you some time. So again, if those are the sorts of things that we need additional guidance or training on, let us know. We'll definitely do our best to get it to you. Good question. Okay, we'll move on. Plant pest pressure, a real big one, as Dan and I mentioned on Tuesday and Thursday. This one, I got to tell you, this one, we had our heads a scratching. And Tony already kind of went through this on the chemical resistance. And we dove deep into CART to make sure that we helped you choose the right categories. As you read the national questions that you will, this is what you'll see in CART when you pull up plant pest pressure. Man, this is all about IPM. And as Tony went into some that great detail, the pesticide loss questions focus heavily on IPM, but so too do the plant pest pressures. And again, here, our plant pest pressure resource concerns are primarily our invasives. So these have not much to do with invasives. So again, we took it upon ourselves to really help you define what these are, and they really have not much to do with the national question. So you really have to pay attention to the Indiana guidance on this one. And so I've circled those. So pretty much where we are assessing invasives, and that's primarily on our pasture and our forest and our associated ag land. Either of the two categories is what you would select if invasives are less than 10% of the planting land unit. Okay, so example, we might stand number 1 shows that we don't have much invasive pressures. Stand number 2 does. So again, stand number 1 could be either of the first two. In all honesty, in CART, they all rank out the same. They both give a met condition right off the bat without having to do any planned or existing practices. Okay, I'm just here to tell you. The third category there is where we've socked that the invasives are more than 10% of the planting land unit. The last two we're saying don't use, and I'll tell you why. If you choose either of those last two, there is no way you can get to a met condition. There's no way you can get to the threshold for pest plant pressure using the system of practices we have available to help us with our invasives issues. Okay, so please follow the Indiana guidance on this using one of the first three, either of the two if invasives are not a problem, the third one if they are. Okay, questions on that? All right, we will move forward. All right, I like to think that the other forest land resource concerns that we went over on Tuesday and Thursday are pretty self-explanatory in CART. Again, CART does do a really good job. CART is here to stay. CART's we're going to get the most value out of CART possible. It does do a good job on our erosion resource concerns, and some of our other ones that are common out there. Okay, so that's a good thing. So we're not going to go into any detail on that. Once you dive into those, you should be able to answer them, or especially even if you have to do some minimal referencing to our Indiana spreadsheet, you should be able to get to those pretty readily, I would hope. As was brought up during Tony's presentation, I do want to cover that question that came up here. And again, this is that other pest management table, and man, it's a good one. Look how big that thing is. This is the pesticide loss. Last year, we did assess this resource concern on our forest land, if I'm not mistaken. This year, we are not, whether it's CSP or general planning and equip. So I'm here to say, for the most part, as a conservation planner, invasive species control likely is not a pesticide loss risk. Typically, yeah, we might be hitting those things for 3 to 5 years, but it's not like a crop field that is getting multiple annual passes of pesticides. That resource concern is more geared toward our cropland. Maybe our pasture land, I would have to disagree that it should be required under CART or under CSP, but it is. But for the most part, it should unlikely be selected for our forest lands. Okay, but if you think it is, then we have given some of the places where we think it does fit, where pesticide use on our forest land would fit for invasives control. Again, that's pretty much in the first and then the last two. So again, if you come across this resource concern in the real world of pesticide loss on forest land, and if this doesn't work out for you, let us know. Otherwise, I would suggest focusing your attention on higher priority resource concerns. Now that doesn't go for orchards. Orchards would be considered more of a cropland, not a forest land. Okay, so any questions on that, or actually any questions in general?
Shannon, Will Drews has his hand up.
Okay, I can't see it. So Al, would you let Will on?
Hey Shannon, this is Will. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how's it going, man?
Good. Hey, I had a question on not that last chart, but the chart before it.
That one?
Yes. So one of my one concerns, and I know that you highlighted click 3 if you are dealing with invasives, is that the 5th category there, pesticide application is the primary strategy used to manage pests. I could see how that would be confusing for some planners to select that immediately, because a lot of our invasive plants, I mean, that's herbicide applications are the primary strategy used to manage them effectively. So I'm just worried, is it possible to have this in bold somewhere just to not confuse people as they're going through carts to select that? Because from a lot of forest management plans or just brush management plans, that's going to be indicated that pesticide application is the primary strategy used to manage the pests.
Right.
So I'm just a little concerned.
And that's why I'm saying ignore that part in cart and use only Indiana guidance. So if we need to make that stronger for anyone who's not listening or does not take in this, we can definitely make that clear. And like I said, if you do check that box in cart, you will never be able to address an invasive species resource concern.
And that's and when you said that got me really concerned thinking about it. So that's sure. I just wanted to
Yeah. So we'll thank you, Will. We'll work on some way to make that more clear. Again, once you're in cart, this is what you will see. So it's going to take a memory jog to make sure that we use the Indiana guidance on this one specifically, and don't inappropriately assess the resource concern for sure.
Okay, thanks.
And thanks for bringing that up. That warrants definitely a more in-depth conversation like you and I had right now, as well as more. I'm not sure what that looks like now, but we need some level of additional guidance to remind our planners about this. And again, I'm most of our area staff who do a lot of quality assurance on our applications. This might be just something to do a random check from time to time, make sure we haven't forgotten this, because again we still got another 3 to 4 months probably of cart work before we start making final decisions, and so this will quickly be forgotten. I can guarantee it would be forgotten by me, but I'll do my best not to. Thanks for bringing it up, Will. Any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none. Let's see what else we can get accomplished. We're rounding the corner. I am pumped up. We are having fun. Okay. We're going to bring this home. Pretty much now you have a basic understanding of conservation planning and planning criteria. You now have a better handle on what is expected of you when you are in the field having conversations with your farmers, so on and so forth. What is cart hungry for? What do you have to find to feed cart, right? Then we kind of went into just today how to spoon that information into cart. Okay, now we're going to kind of get into what do you do with that information? What is cart doing with it, and how do you use that to further have conversations with your farmers to really get that resource concern addressed out there on the land. Okay. And again, we're not going to show you how to do all the clickety-clacks of CART. We feel we've done that last year and through Jennifer Chin's online training resources and other. But by all means, if you need more of that, reach out to Jamie Schonkweiler and your area staff. And let's make sure we get that to you. Here's what I'm saying. There's enough. You're going to struggle enough with CART with just the number of clicks. Don't struggle with CART with what to click. Okay, that's what we're here for, to help you. You make a decision, you know what to click. Yeah, you might have to click it 1,000 times, but at least you're clicking the right button 1,000 times, right? So that's my promise to you. We will help you with that. And if you haven't been into CART this year, National has done a lot of things that have really streamlined the process. I'm not going to highlight those, or I'll probably talk about them, but may not highlight them today. But CART FY21 is much, much, much more easier than FY20, so that's a good thing. Okay, if you haven't been in there to see those changes, I won't steal your thunder once you get in there. That way you'll be nice and happy. All right. Okay. First of all, I probably should have covered this at the beginning of today, but we did release this information that we've been referencing in Indiana Bulletin 21-01 on December 8th. In that guidance, we issued the CART questions report tool, that spreadsheet that I keep talking about, as well as 2 tables for the required resource concerns for general planning /EQIP and one for CSP. Hoping those resources will be a little more efficient for you than they were last year. Last year, they were kind of convoluted. This year, we tried to separate them out and send them all at the same time. The spreadsheet tool itself is housed in section 3 of our Field Office Tech Guide, along with our resource concern plan list that Jennifer went over on Monday, the national wordy document, as well as the matching CART spreadsheet for Indiana. We did that, and I'll say this kind of slowly. I'm going to catch everyone's attention. As some of us know, we do have consultants working on behalf of farmers to get them into CSP. All right? Y'all are probably shaking your heads, some of you, especially in the central part of the state. We need to make this information public. And so we have through the Tech Guide. So if you have farmers who are working with a consultant, or consultant contacts you, you can direct them to the Field Office Tech Guide section 3, and they can have the same information that you have, so that they know the data they need to be getting from their farmers and on the field to help our clients get through CART. Okay? Comments or questions on that? Okay, and I'm proud to also kind of make public a new feature that we did for the Indiana SharePoint homepage. If you haven't been there recently, now when you open Indiana SharePoint, this is what you will see in the upper left. FY21 information. This is a recommendation from the IFEC, and we really appreciate that recommendation coming through your leader, Brian Musser. Thank you very much, Brian. A team of us at the state office took that recommendation and developed this system. We are not revamping SharePoint. We are not changing where things are stored, but we just made information easier for you to find. The best example we have is CART. Hey, I'm looking for guidance on how to answer a CART question. Where do I go? Do I start at technology? Do I start at programs? Do I start at e-directives? Okay, now I got a question about CART ranking. Do I start at e-directives? Do I start at technology? Do I start at programs? And if I know where to start, where the heck do I even go from there? So we've put everything in one upfront spot. You click on CART, you get this next screen in the bottom right, and you can see the lingo there. If you click on those things that have the little arrow, that'll take you directly to the document. Some things need a little more parsing out, so we have a folder system. We've tried to minimize your clicks to get the information you need. You can see the little highlighted thing there. That's the spreadsheet tool that we just issued on Tuesday. You click on that and it'll open right up for you. Okay, so that should hopefully help you as well. And again, as we get new information released, we will add it to this front page. If you like going into programs or into technology and going through that, you can still do that. It's still there. This is just a quicker reference, 2-click, hopefully in most cases, to get you where you need to be. And we'll hopefully help see the benefits of it for you. Moving on. Okay. So let's dive into what you're going to see. So you have done your planning efforts with your farmer. you've done your click clacking into cart. Now you got to know what's up. Okay, so we're going to kind of walk through an anatomy of the report. This is the results link if you're familiar with that on cart. This is what should pop up. First of all, you see your existing conditions. That is the results of the data you fed cart. That's assessing the benchmark conditions, the existing conditions, whatever you prefer to call it. Cart calls it existing conditions. Then you go over to your existing total, which is your inventory / cart question answers, plus any existing practice points that any existing practices that you may have entered or came over from the historical records into cart. Then you get into your planned practice points, which is the summation of your existing total plus your planned practices points. And of course, then you have a threshold. Okay. So what does it all mean? Well, like Jennifer went over on Monday, if your planned total is greater than or equal to your threshold, planning criteria are met. That means you have at least gotten to the line that national headquarters has established for addressing that resource concern by what the farmer had done existing, the land form, the inherent soil properties, the existing practices the farmer has implemented, and then your planned practices that you've had conversations with your farmer to adopt. That's where we need to be. If we're in the CSP world, that is the MET line that is so critical for some of our renewals and new offers to at least get to and or past. Okay. Likewise, if that planned total is less than the threshold, that means planning criteria are not met. Again, in the conservation planning world / equip, that means there's still room for improvement. This does not necessarily impact eligibility. It just means the farmer has additional things they could be doing to really meet planning criteria. Again, they will get a ranking point based on those the plan practice points, but they won't rank as high as somebody who does even more practices to get more plan practice points, so on and so forth. Okay. In the CSP world, could be a deal breaker. If a farmer can't get past this with their planned practices, then they may not meet basic eligibility, or at least they may not rank as high as their neighbor who is willing to do more. Okay. Comments or questions on how to interpret a report in CART? Okay, we will move on. Okay, as you dive into these reports and these assessments and results, you may start seeing some differences, and we're here to kind of help explain better why you may see some differences. And Stephanie did a good job of this, so I'm going to hit that again to make sure that you've heard it at least twice. Okay, so here we have an example of 2 crop fields that are actually managed the same way. Again, these are 2 CLUs as FSA has them. You can tell that they're farmed the same way, but they do have different predominant soil types. As you run, if you've entered your initial resource inventory, and as you've entered your initial resource inventory fields, you can see where field 1 comes out on the thresholds compared to field number 2. And so this is where you might see that, hey, if we do some conservation, and it's the same on both fields, we might get one field that meets the threshold and another that doesn't, even though they appear to be the same. And again,
Hey,
as Stephanie, yeah.
I'm sorry. Should we add existing practices into CART for equip applications?
Yes, we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay.
So right now we're just kind of focusing on the results of your resource inventory. Okay, so we'll cover existing practices in a little bit, and if I don't cover it adequately, we'll make sure we do. Okay, so we've entered the resource inventory. We've assessed nutrients and sediment, as well as sheet and rill erosion, and you can see that each field is different on the threshold. You know, the line to get to is different. That is because of a whole host of factors that are going on behind the scenes. Think about back, 2 years ago to assess sheet and rill erosion, we were using Russell 2, right? And we went to the field, we got the information from the farmer, but really to know whether we were meeting sheet and rill erosion resource concerns, we had to run Russell 2. Russell 2 is looking at climate, soils, rotation, tillage, all those factors that go on in that outstanding model. CART now does that for you. It knows where these fields are. It figures out the predominant soil, and it makes those calculations for you. Okay, that's why you may see different thresholds for different fields, and why one field might meet planning criteria / CSP eligibility, and another may not. Okay, so we'll go into a little more detail on that here. If you want to know the detail, we have a document at the national level, and I put a snapshot here of what that says. And if you want to read that, by all means, go right ahead. If you want to understand it, please. That document is linked through the SharePoint, like I just showed you. And I'm just here to say that there is a lot of science behind CART. And you don't need to worry about it. You just need to be aware that it is going on, so that you can adequately explain to a farmer that, hey, you didn't do as well in your ranking as your neighbor, even though you're doing the exact same practices. You know, farmer number one, your soils are more at risk, less at risk, what have you, compared to your neighbor. That's why you didn't rank out the same. You have to do a little more conservation because your soils are either more leaching, more erosive, so on and so forth. Okay, know it's going on behind the scenes. As Stephanie mentioned, you don't get a printout of what these calculations are. I just got to say, you got to trust it. But you can see the equations that go into it. You know, it's a lot of the same science that has gone into our erosion prediction calculations and others, but it's just happening for you rather than you than the way Russell used to do. Okay. You know, you can see in item number 5 there's even a way that how they decide the planning soil for a field that has multiple soil types. So again, they've done a pretty good job there. Okay. If you remember, we had different thresholds also for our nutrients, not only our sediment and sheet and rill, but also our nutrients. So again, there's a similar process that goes on behind the scenes to assess soil runoff. And you can tell here that these are just some snapshots of some of the tables that are in that document. When I say the document, that we call that the 192-page document, because again, it can be a real fun read if you want to read it. But these are just some snapshots from the nutrient resource concern assessment. Again, you've fed CART. CART knows where you are in the world because you've digitized your land units in CD, and then you've told it some things about the nutrient use on that farm, as Tony went through. And then it's using all these calculations to decide, what is your threshold, and is there enough conservation on the ground to address that resource concern? So it's looking at soil runoff for nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, different assessments for each, as well as leaching potential for nitrogen and phosphorus. So again, a lot goes on behind the scenes that you need to be aware of, but you don't need to know the details unless you really want to know the details. And I'll tell you what,
Shannon, got a comment. Conceptual ranking. Where does CART flip over from being a conservation assessment to being a ranking tool? Before or after it comes up with the practice points and threshold level?
After. Mm-hmm. We're still on the assessment part here, but this assessment does impact a part of the ranking. It's not the only thing, but it does in part impact the ranking. The more conservation, the more at risk a site is, and the more conservation benefit. So the lower the existing practice points or the existing condition points plus existing practices, the lower that is compared to the higher the planned practice points gets, the more likely the higher ranking. So again, higher risk plus a lot of conservation going on the ground means more resource benefit. Compared to someone at high risk and only doing one practice, they're not going to rank as high on this one factor of the overall ranking process. So yeah, so we're still back on the conservation assessment part. We're not even going to touch the ranking right now. That's going to come later for y'all. Okay, and again, that's a behind the scenes calculation that I know Adam has addressed the question on that it's we don't want to call them a black box, but let's just call them a very dark blue box that we just have to trust that the calculations are being completed consistently across the nation. Again, all of this is national. There's nothing in here that is Indiana behind the scenes. Okay. Very good question. All right. So any questions on what we don't know that goes on behind the scenes, but we trust? All right. So let's get into the next phase of CART. So we've done our resource inventory, and hopefully, I would suggest, in all honesty, as you're spending more time in CART this year, hopefully we have more time to learn it. As you complete a resource inventory, before you start adding practices and plan practices and so on, take a look at that results report and just kind of get a feel for how different a farm can be. This is one of the values really of CART too, is farms are diverse, even if they're small. One field to the next can be totally different. This should help us to hone in our conservation planning skills, and not just say, hey, yeah, you've got 1,000 acres of cropland, let's go no-till and cover crops and nutrient management, and boom, I'll run you through the system and see how you rank. CART will allow us to say, hey, wow, there's this one field, and it's way different than the others. This allows us to go back to that farmer and say, hey, that one field just needs a little extra tender loving care. We might have to use a different cover crop species mix, or maybe we need some buffers, or we need some structural practices here, some vegetation, because it's just different. And you can see that in CART much more easy, I think, than you could have seen in our previous planning tools and efforts. So that is one benefit. But again, you got to kind of enter the data, see what it spits out, and see where those differences are, and then try to figure out, okay, why is that? Again, use your planning skills, figure that out, and have those conversations with the farmers. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next phase of CART after we've done our resource inventory and we understand why we have different thresholds on different fields. And now it's time to start scheduling some of our practices. The next phase of conservation planning. CART, first of all, does ask for existing practices. And if we have worked with that farm in the past, and we have entered those data into a conservation program in the toolkit environment or the conservation desktop environment, and the producer has installed those practices, they should come over as what we call historical on the existing practices feature of CART. So a couple key things here. We're not getting into the details of existing and planned practices today. If we need that, by all means, we will give that to you. This is kind of a down the road type thing. There's still some nuances that headquarters is releasing. I got a little thing about that Jamie sent out on Tuesday night as well. So things are kind of changing. So we want to wait until all that dust is settled, and then we can go out and give you some direct training on the practices and so on and so forth. But just a couple of key items that were the same last year, and they still are there here this year, that we want to make sure you're aware of. You can see here there's an existing practices historical snapshot of a CSP application. Where in the past they had applied E590A, E595A, and E595B. CART does not recognize these practices toward the existing practice score. Okay, so to get credit for these past installed CSP enhancements, you also have to make sure that the actual conservation practice itself is also identified as an existing practice. Okay, and again, that's primarily for the CSP side of things, where being at the MET threshold already when you start is more important in some cases than, say, EQIP. Okay, and again, now you can see the snapshot of the existing practices that come up in CART, and then down here is your summary report. So you can see we've got planned total exceeds threshold in all cases. Woohoo! This is a good farm. We've done a lot of conservation in the past. We're already past the thresholds for resource concerns, planning criteria, and so that's pretty cool. But I do want you to study that table in the upper left. Tell me if anything looks peculiar to anybody on that list of historical existing practices. Shout it out or chat it up.
Two types of tillage.
Exactly. Good. Good eye. Good eye. Yeah. Can we have no-till and reduced tillage on the same field? I'll answer that question. If you look at the standard as a annual practice, yes, you can have no-till soybeans and vertical till corn. So this is some guidance we're going to be sending out. And again, we saw this with our CSP consultants because they said, hey, in 2022, the guy's going to plant no-till. So in 2023, he's going to go back to reduced till. It's like, okay, we should only have one tillage system on our crop fields. And there's some other practices like that too. We'll be getting you additional guidance out on this just to make sure that, again, this came over from the historical records. That 345 might have been 10 years ago. 329 might have just been recent. So we need to tell CART which one is currently the system. And as Stephanie mentioned, we're going to define that as has been implemented for at least 3 years in a row. Again, so if we catch a farmer in his second year of no-till, we would assess that as 345, but then we can also schedule 329 to continue that no-till adoption into the future. And if it's eligible for programs and so on, we can do that. But if we find these issues, we need to correct it. So I'm going to show you here real quick how to correct it in existing practices. You just uncheck the functional box, and it'll ask you for comments. You have to enter a comment. You can just type anything, but you add something of value. So for example, let's say this farm, we had an old equip contract to get him into reduced till. Then we got him into a CSP, and he adopted no till. But we go back out there today, and he reverted back to mulch till, reduced tillage. So we could say, well, 329 is not fully adopted any longer, but we're going to move him back into it because he saw the light, and he's not wanting to till anymore. So we're moving him forward. So anyways, you can see as we check out the no-till, his scores change. So again, what CART does, it adds both of the existing practice points for mulch and no-till, and it double counts them. So in all honesty, a rotational tillage system, if we enter it that way in CART, ranks higher than a continuous no-tiller. We know that's wrong. We'll work with headquarters, see if we can fix that. But for this point, we'd have to manually recognize that and fix it ourselves. Now we show that we are below the threshold, and we can talk to that farmer about adopting additional practices to get them above that threshold and move them into the next level of conservation. Comments or questions on that? Okay, the question came up about equip and existing practices. We will give guidance out on that. We need to put some thought to it. We don't want you to waste your time, but we really have to think about what that means for the equality of ranking across the state. So we'll give you additional guidance on that. Right now, the last year's guidance was don't sweat existing practices and equip, but we might need to take another look at that. We will get that out to you here real soon. Okay? Thanks for that question. All right, let's move real quick into plan practices. Again, this training will not teach you how to schedule plan practices and the details, but I do want to highlight a few things that have changed this year. As you are hopefully aware, national headquarters reined in all state and local practice narratives and only went with national narratives. So your only option now is to use the national narratives for our conservation practices in Conservation Desktop. For the most part, there is only one national narrative per practice. However, there are some practices that have more than one national narrative, 590 being one of them. So how do you know which one to choose? Again, as you get into CART, and this is a new feature of CART this year, as you choose 590 as a planned practice, you also have to choose the right row for the right narrative. And we attempted to link those narratives with the appropriate practice payment scenario and equip through the practice user guide. Okay, so again, I'll show you where that is on the practice user guide. Again, if you haven't dove into the material that's been issued yet for equip and other programs, That's a new feature. And again, how you make that link between CART, the payment scenario, and conservation planning in general. These narratives, where there are more than one, they do have different planned practice points and how far they get toward that resource concern. So for example, 590 National Narrative 03N has more positive practice points for nutrient loss as compared to, say, the 01N. Okay, so it's very important to match up, again, CART with what the farmer plans to do. If they're planning to do precision or injection, as opposed to a farmer only doing the basic 590, CART will give more credit for the precision than they will for the basic. So that's a good thing. But again, it takes that conservation planning at the very beginning to know what kind of nutrient management we're going to talk that farmer into and what they're capable of doing. Okay. Comments or questions on this? Okay, as I mentioned, there was a new. Yes.
Quick question. Is there any way we can access the old narratives? And I don't mean for future planning, but there are still some corrections being made from past, especially with CRP. So are we only to select the national narrative code if that's the practice being used? If we need to update, say, an 1155 or a comms plan for something that was planned under the FY20 rules?
Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you go in through Conservation Desktop, the only narratives available to you are going to be the national. However, if you need to modify a plan, hopefully there's an Excel file or a separate 1155 that is not tied into CD per se. So that could be an option where you can just clickety-clack it in. And/or, again, if you're talking CRP, you can hand pen and ink change those. Other than that, you are looking at the national narrative, and then you'd want to customize your job sheet or supporting documentation that goes along with that 1155 narrative entry.
Thank you.
Good question. All right. As I mentioned, many thanks to Jamie Schonkweiler for stepping up while Jennifer's up helping the nation. Yeah, she did send this message out to everybody, letting everyone know that there was a new CART bill that was pushed out the evening of this past Tuesday, and you can see some of the things that are in that bill. Again, we will be getting you more information as needed on this. We're not going to get into detail today. Just wanted you to be aware of that. But again, things are coming down from national. As they come down, we will give you the information you need so you can navigate CART as best as you can. Okay.
Shannon?
Right. Yes.
Sorry, got a question. Generally speaking, do you have a sense of who typically will rank higher in CART for CSP? An applicant that is minimum till and is willing to no-till and plant cover crops, or a farmer who is already doing those things and is willing to do some enhancements? Are we still rewarding the good actors?
The general statement is yes, we are still rewarding the good actors, but they also have to do additional conservation. I think it's going to be site specific on who might rank higher in that scenario. Again, if anyone else has, Adam or anyone else has an idea of how to answer that, I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and we can get back with you on that. But it pretty much, I think you're going to have to enter that both applicants in the CART and see how they come out, in all honesty. But we can run through some scenarios if that's of help. In a general speaking, again, it's hard to. CART is very site specific. That is a great thing about it. No two farms are going to be alike in CART for the most part. It's more precise than we've ever had in our past planning efforts. In general speaking, that's a good question. I'm interested to know the answer. All right, let's move on. As you know, I've mentioned CART is here. I'm confident CART is here to stay. There's going to be improvements for sure. Again, we're in the second, not even the second year, 1.1 years of CART implementation. National is feverishly making improvements, getting input from the states. So again, as you find things in the real world that just don't work in CART, float those up to your area staff, float those up to us at the state office. We'll do our best to communicate those and see if we can get some tweaks to CART and make it that much more science-based and that much more precise. So there are some parts already that we know of in the real world that CART just does not do a good job of. And Tony alluded to a lot of these, and Victor and others. Again, CART doesn't know anything about blowholes. They don't know anything about tile risers. Even though CART asks for information about grazing on cropland, on forest land, it doesn't do anything with it. So I'm just going to, soil test phosphorus levels, as Tony mentioned. So I'll show you a couple things here that you need to be aware of. Here's an example of a crop field where, again, you can see that I identified that there was over 100,000 cows on this crop field. I documented it. I put it in CART. The only question CART asked me about nutrients, or are nutrients applied? And I said, yeah. And that's all I entered. 100,000 cows on this land unit. CART doesn't care. I can't say it doesn't care. It doesn't read those data. This is the system of practices that we have on this: crop rotation, cover crop, pest management, and no-till. And you can see for nutrients, we are past the threshold. Woo! Yet we know in the real world, this is what we saw. We saw tile risers. We saw mucked up crop field blowholes. We know there's a nutrient issue out there. Even though the farmer has done a lot of conservation, they have high soil test phosphorus. They have a need for further conservation. Okay, so I'm going to show you an override that we didn't highlight last year. As a conservation planner, and I'm just going to get on my soapbox here. As a conservation planner, I'm just going to tell you, you should not be concerned with what goes on behind the scenes as far as planned practice points or existing practice points. Your job as a conservation planner is to go to the land, look at the resource condition, talk to the farmer, convince that farmer of what the next best practice for them is, meet them where they are, talk about the next step, enter that in the CART, and let it shake out where it is. However, in this case, it shook out, yet we know that's not true. So we can override the existing practice, the existing total points. And in this situation, we should. Program or not, again, this may have implications for programs, but as a conservation planner, and in our conservation planning tool of CART, we should be overriding these situations when we find them. So again, you can override the existing. You tell it what's going on. And again, it may not fit perfectly, but I just chose the questions not working for local condition. I said CART does not account for the livestock access, the tile risers, and the high soil test phosphorus. And so what I did then is I overrid that existing total to where now that plan shows that they are not currently at the threshold, and any planned practices that we can talk to the farmer about to get them above that is true to life conservation. Okay, that's just one feature. Again, it's work, but again, as a conservation planner, I'm suggesting we should be doing that. Comments or questions? And again, we can give you more details on what this means and how to. We've already given you override guidance on what to do when things don't rank out high enough. This is kind of going the opposite way, pulling on your conservation heartstrings. All right, Brianne, you want to cover this part of where CART may not work out right?
Oh, sure, Shannon. We can go through this really, really quickly. So I just wanted to touch base, basically kind of following up from the wildlife side, everything Shannon just covered, because since we are using the WAG, and the WAG is in wildlife as a resource concern is just a little different than everything else, because wildlife can be everywhere. How we manage for wildlife, especially in terms of working lands for wildlife, differs across the board. It can be a little confusing when we get to all of these plan scores and does it meet the threshold or not, what's going on. So as we've discussed with the wildlife resource concerns, you're going run them through the WEG. There's 2 examples of the WEG up on Shannon's screen right now, some of the results that you may get. So you've done that with the landowner, you've been out on site, it was poor before, and then you've planned with them, and you get to that good or the excellent score. You get that all entered into CART, and you put in the existing or the planned practices, and suddenly it says it's not met. And you're like, what's going on? This landowner is doing as much as they can out there. And so what I wanted to kind of go over today is just keep in mind that there are practices out there that are good for wildlife, but because of those behind the scene practice points that we just talked about, they may not even be associated with the wildlife resource concerned. And really where this has affected us a lot last year, and I don't think it's going to be as much of a problem this year, was with CSP or with those working lands projects that were out there. So in terms of CSP, when we were thinking it was possible, or we were under the, I would just say the philosophy that enhancing a site or enhancing a crop field by adding wildlife habitat was enhancing it, and it was enhancing the land use, but what we weren't doing was enhancing existing habitat out there. The wildlife score was not necessarily meeting that threshold. That will change this year because there does need to be existing habitat, or we need to meet the threshold by installing the practice as well. But where that can also come into effect is we know there are other practices, whether they're forestry practices like some of the forest stand improvement, whether they're some of the grazing practices that are of benefit to bobwhite quail. Many of those practices do not have the same weight in the practice point system as they would in our WEG. So our WEG acknowledges those practices will do a lot for the species we're targeting, but those practice points behind the scenes will not. And that's because you just can't assess that across the nation. It's just not possible. Everyone has different wildlife species we're managing for, and the practices we use across the nation are also very broad. So know those kinds of things are going on in the background. And so if you have done one of these working lands for wildlife for bobwhite, and we've had a few applications over the last year, know that there is that option of the planner override, and that would be in that positive way, that you have a WEG score that justifies that the work that the landowner is going to do out there is going to be of benefit to the species. Go ahead and account for that, even if the practice points don't, because there's just too many different practices that can be used in that working lands model. And even outside of working lands for wildlife itself, we still use other practices to be of benefit to wildlife. Just know that we can use that override, or that may be why those thresholds weren't met, even though everything else that you have, or everything that you know for what can occur out on site, that's a possibility. So I just wanted to real quick touch on that because it's just a little different with the wildlife, because it can incorporate those working lands practices, it incorporates the habitat practices, and those are really hard to attribute in all the different options behind the scenes. That's all I have, Shannon.
All right, great. Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian on that? Okay. And you had a couple more things you want to highlight. You good?
I think I covered all that. I didn't realize you had all the slides.
Okay. Cool. Couple of the couple of the points. If you can hang on for just a couple more minutes, everybody, I really appreciate it. Otherwise, you can come back and cast a recording when we make that available. I also forgot to mention, we will have the recordings for all of these sessions available by Wednesday morning. Okay. We're still sorting through whether we want recordings of the same thing that we replicated, or if we're just going to offer one. So Wednesday morning, if you have counterparts, or weren't able to participate in all these, we will have those available Wednesday morning. I want to kind of go through a couple more things here. As we mentioned at the very beginning of Monday, a planner almost could do conservation planning from the office using CART, and that's good or bad, whatever you think about that. Here in Indiana, we are still going to make sure that we have that connection to the land. We are professional certified planners. we will maintain that level of technical quality and integrity here in the state, so long as I have a say in it and I'm not overridden. But a couple things, as we mentioned, Stephanie did a great job of explaining how we can be effective with CART without actually having to do all kinds of soil health assessments up front. We know that the upfront time period is critical for us. There's deadlines, there's obligation deadlines, there's all kinds of stuff eating your lunch. So we're going to make sure that we enabled a interview portion for assessing soil health, because it's so critical for us. But again, as we went through over in Stephanie's presentation, we will be doing a soil health assessment before we come and put that final job sheet of cover crops or whatever, the final details of what that farmer has to do for their EQIP contract, CSP contract, or general conservation plan. We will, that is not a reason to not do soil health assessments. We will still do soil health assessments. We will just do them before practice implementation. Okay. Soil erosion. As you can tell, CART, we mentioned Russell 2 a couple times. CART gives us an answer that Russell 2 used to. So again, we'll use the CART results. It is more efficient for us. We will say, hey, you had a sheet and roll erosion resource concern. You're doing enough practices to address it. That's great. Here's our contract. Let's move forward. But we will still use Russell 2 or WEP or the wind erosion prediction system, depending on what the soil erosion type is and the tool available at the time, to refine and define that specific system that will get that farmer to T or below. Okay, so we are not done with Russell 2. It's just going to hit us in a different place in the process. Okay, comments, questions on that? Okay, we're rounding it down here. Just want to make sure you're aware of some additional resources. As I mentioned, there are resources available through the SharePoint, so that front end. I've highlighted a couple of them here. The first one is that practice point spreadsheet. The second one is the CART resource concern assessment document. Here's a snapshot of the practice point spreadsheet. Like I said, if you want to know what's going on behind the scenes when you schedule a practice, these data are available to you. You can see that by practice, by resource concern, the practice points that national, again, these are national established for the various land uses for that practice, and by the practice narrative. Likewise, I mentioned the CART resource concern assessment document. It's 192 pages of detailed science and calculations and soils and all kinds of other great stuff. It's available to you if you want to know it. You don't have to, just know what's going on, but it is available if you want to read it. So with that, any final questions before we let you back to your afternoon/weekend? And while you're maybe thinking of questions or typing these things up, I just want to really, really thank you. I am so proud of Indiana's employees. I mean, you have no idea, or maybe you do. As I work with my counterparts across the nation, I put each and every one of you, my staff, each and every one of our certified planners, I would put you up against any of your counterparts across this nation, and you'd blow them out of the water. Keep that up. Please keep that up. Please let us know how we can help you to be as technically competent to help you spend the time in the field that you need, assessing those resource concerns, choosing those right alternatives. I just can't speak any more volumes of how great it is to be here in this state and to work together with you all for our joint resource concerns out there. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that. Appreciate that too, Tom. Right back at you guys. I really want to thank my staff. They work diligently on this. I'll tell you, having a field session is much more simple than doing it virtual. I think they would agree with that. I don't know what the percentage of work is, but this is a lot more work to try to get the quality training through a virtual environment. But doggone it, we are where we are, and I'm super proud of my folks for putting this together and giving you some as good a quality as we could. Hopefully, next chance we get for this, we'll be in the field together, kicking the plants and the soil and looking at things and truly interacting with you. But I really appreciate all of you too for interacting through the chat, through the unmuting. Yeah, you guys made this awesome. It's sometimes hard just to talk to yourself, but knowing that people are listening really helps. Much appreciated. Thanks for all those comments, Amy, Susanna, Christy, Dan. Appreciate that. Any final comments from my staff or anybody else?
I think
That
it's
would
time to
be
go enjoy.
Al humming.
I told you, it sounds like a bass guitar.
All
I think
right.
what I was going to say, Shannon, is I think it's time to go enjoy the sunshine. Oh my
I agree.
goodness.
Let's get outside in a safe manner. So hey, Al, stop the recording. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much. My staff, stay on for just a quick second if you don't mind. Great work, everybody.